There is a quiet, unglamorous Indian realm, often seeking DDCs by businesses who find grants painless from the ones who find them a nightmare. And it is not writing or strategy or anything clever. It is keeping records. A supported project almost always ends with you having to show what you did and what you spent in an orderly way to actually receive the support. And the business that kept a clean trail as it went does this in an afternoon, while the business that did not spends weeks reconstructing the past from memory and the shoebox of receipts, often coming up short. Nobody makes videos about record keeping because it is not exciting, but it is precisely the sort of dull discipline that quietly determines whether the whole thing works out. So in the next few minutes, we are going to make record keeping simple so it protects you instead of haunting you. One note before we begin, this channel is educational only. We are not a government agency. We are not affiliated with or endorsed by Go Business, Enterprise Singapore, or any government body, and nothing here is official advice. We name no schemes, no criteria, and no figures because those change over time. So we will always point you back to the official source, gobusiness.gov.sg, to confirm what actually applies to your situation before you rely on any of it. Why records decide the claim? When it comes time to actually receive support, you are usually asked to demonstrate what happened, and demonstration means evidence, not memory. Your records are that evidence, and their quality often decides whether the process is smooth or painful, and sometimes whether it succeeds at all. This catches good businesses out because they did the project properly. They genuinely spent the money and did the work, and they assume that being honest is enough. It is not, because honesty you cannot show looks the same as a claim you cannot support, and the burden is on you to prove, not on anyone else to take your word. A clean set of records turns your honesty into something visible and checkable, which is exactly what is needed at the end. Think of records not as bureaucracy, but as the proof of your own good faith, kept ready for the moment you need it, because that moment always comes. Keep records as you go, not at the end. The single most important habit is to keep your records as the project happens, not to reconstruct them afterwards. This sounds obvious and almost nobody does it, because in the middle of a project, the doing feels urgent and the recording feels like it can wait. It cannot, or rather it can, but at a terrible price. Memory fades, documents get lost, people who knew the details move on, and the version of events you assemble months later is always thinner and shakier than the real thing would have been if you had captured it in the moment. Recording as you go costs a few minutes at a time and produces something solid. Reconstructing at the end costs days of stressful archaeology and produces something full of gaps. The discipline is simply to capture each thing when it happens, while it is fresh and the evidence is still to hand, rather than trusting a future version of yourself to remember. What good record keeping actually looks like. Good record keeping is not complicated. It is just consistent. For a supported project, it broadly means being able to show three things clearly. What you spent with the documents that prove each cost, what you did with evidence that the work genuinely happened, and how the two connect to the project you said you were doing. That is really the whole of it. You are building a story that anyone reasonable could follow, from the project you described, to the things you bought and did, to the proof that each of those was real. None of this requires special software or expertise. It requires the ordinary documents that a well-run business generates anyway, kept together, kept complete, and kept in order. The businesses that struggle are not the ones lacking sophistication. They are the ones who let the ordinary documents scatter and disappear until there was nothing left to assemble. The paper trail for every cost. For each cost in your project, there is a small chain of documents that together prove it was real, and keeping that chain intact is the heart of the whole exercise. Broadly, a cost has a beginning, some form of agreement or order for the thing. It has a middle, the bill or invoice for it. And it has an end, the proof that you actually paid, the record of money leaving your business. Each link matters because a bill with no proof of payment shows only an intention, and a payment with no invoice shows only that money moved, not what for. Kept together, the chain tells the complete story of a real cost, and that completeness is what makes it credible. So for every expense in the project, gather and keep the whole chain, not just the convenient middle of it, because a broken chain is where claims stumble even when the spending was entirely genuine. Match the money to the project. A cost on its own does not help you. What helps is a cost you can clearly tie to the supported project rather than to your general running of the business. This is where a lot of otherwise honest record keeping falls down, because the expense is real, but there is nothing linking it specifically to the project, and the cost, that could belong to anything, is hard to claim for something in particular. So build the connection in as you go. Keep project costs identifiable and separate from your everyday spending, so that when you look back it is obvious which expenses belong to the project and which were simply the business running as usual. The cleaner the separation, the easier everything at the end becomes. A business that mingles its project spending into the general flow of money will spend painful hours later trying to disentangle what belonged where, and will never be quite sure it got it right. Money is only half the story, because a supported project is not just something you paid for, it is something you did, and you generally need to be able to show that the doing genuinely happened. This is the half owners forget, because receipts feel like the real evidence and the work feels self-evident. It is not self-evident to anyone who was not there. So keep proof that the project actually took place in whatever ordinary forms it naturally produces, the outputs it created, the records of it being carried out, the tangible signs that this was a real piece of work and not just a set of invoices. What counts as proof depends entirely on what the project was, and we are not going to prescribe it, but the instinct is right in every case. As the work happens, quietly keep the evidence that it happened, because at the end you may need to show the doing as clearly as the paying. Set up a home for everything. The practical foundation of good record keeping is deciding at the very start where everything is going to live. Before the project begins, make a single, clear home for all its records. One place where every document, every proof, every relevant piece goes as it arrives. It does not matter much whether that home is physical, digital, or both. What matters is that it exists and that everything goes into it consistently, rather than scattering across your inbox, your drawers, your phone, and your memory. A dedicated home turns record keeping from a search into a deposit, because there is never any question of where a thing belongs. Businesses that skip this step do not realize the cost until the end, when the records they need are spread across a dozen places and half of them cannot be found. 10 minutes of setup at the start saves days of hunting later, which is about the best trade a busy owner can make. Name things so you can find them. Having a home for your records is only useful if you can find things inside it, and that comes down to the dull, powerful habit of naming and organizing as you go. A pile of documents with unhelpful names is barely better than no records at all, because the information is technically there but practically unreachable when you need it under time pressure. So adopt a simple, consistent way of labeling things so that any document can be found in seconds rather than minutes, and so that the shape of the whole project is visible at a glance. You do not need an elaborate system, you need a plain one you will actually stick to. Consistency beats cleverness here every time. The goal is that when the moment comes to assemble everything, you are gathering from an orderly shelf rather than digging through a heap, and that difference is entirely decided by small habits kept along the way. A mistake that catches owners well after a project is over is throwing records away too soon, because the obligation to be able to show what happened often outlasts the project itself, sometimes by a considerable stretch. Once the support has been received and the work is done, it is tempting to feel finished and to let the records drift away, but the requirement to keep them and to be able to produce them if asked can continue for a long while afterwards, so resist the urge to clear the decks. Keep everything in its orderly home, for well beyond the point where it feels necessary, and treat the records as still live until you have positively confirmed you are free of any obligation to hold them. We will not put a length on this, because it varies and changes, but the safe instinct is to keep for longer than you think rather than shorter, because records you kept and did not need cost almost nothing, while records you discarded and then needed cannot be recovered. Make it a routine, not a scramble. Everything in this video becomes effortless if you turn it into a routine, and impossible if you leave it as a scramble at the end. The trick is to make record keeping a small, regular rhythm woven into the project rather than a giant task waiting at the finish. Set a modest recurring moment, whatever suits how you work, to file the latest documents, update your simple records, and make sure nothing has slipped through. A little and often keeps the trail complete and the effort invisible, because you never faced more than a few items at a time. Left to the end, the same work arrives all at once, under pressure, with gaps that can no longer be filled, which is the situation every horror story about claims comes from. The businesses for whom this is painless are not more organized by nature, they simply made it a habit, and the habit is something any business can build if it decides to. Confirm what to keep at the source. 1 necessary cautions. What you actually need to keep, in what form, for how long, and in what detail, depends on the specific support and changes over time. And it is not something we can spell out here, because we deal in no specifics and those specifics shift. So treat this video as the general discipline of good record keeping, the habits that serve you well whatever the requirements turn out to be, and go to gobusiness.gov.sg to confirm exactly what any support you are pursuing expects you to keep and produce. Read the official guidance for the real requirements, follow them precisely, and where you are unsure, ask through the official channels rather than guessing, because getting this wrong is expensive at exactly the wrong moment. The habits keep you ready. The official source tells you what being ready actually means for your situation today, and only it can do that reliably. A closing thought. So here is the dull discipline that quietly decides everything. When it is time to receive support, you must show what you did and what you spent, and your records are that proof. So keep them as you go, rather than reconstructing them from memory at the end. Keep the full paper trail for every cost. Tie each cost clearly to the project, and keep evidence that the work itself genuinely happened, not just that money moved. Give everything a single home from day one, name things so you can find them in seconds, and hold on to your records for longer than feels necessary. Above all, make it a small routine rather than a giant scramble, because that single choice is what separates a painless claim from a nightmare. Remember too that everything here is general and educational. We are not a government agency, and we are not affiliated with or endorsed by anyone, and we name no specifics because they change. So confirm exactly what to keep on gobusiness.gov.sg. If this made the boring part feel manageable, subscribe for more plain English Singapore grant explainers, and we will keep protecting you from the avoidable pain.